My name is Jen, and my world is built on numbers. Not in the way a mathematician loves equations, but in the way a prisoner loves the bars of their cell. They're predictable, they're safe. My alarm goes off at 6:15 a.m., not 6:14, not 6:16. The snooze button is a tiny agent of chaos I refuse to entertain. My shower is 7 minutes long, the water heated to precisely 39 degrees Celsius, warm enough to be comfortable, not hot enough to be indulgent. I own 12 work blouses, all muted tones, and 7 pairs of identical black trousers. My breakfast is 60 grams of rolled oats, 200 milliliters of water, and exactly 12 blueberries. 12. It's a solid, divisible number. This isn't a lifestyle choice, it's a fortress. Every scheduled minute, every pre-portioned meal, every optimized route to the office is another brick in the wall I've built around myself. In my job, they call me a risk assessment expert. I get paid a ridiculous amount of money to predict the future. I run simulations on market volatility, supply chain disruptions, and PR disasters. I am the corporate Cassandra, a prophet of doom in a pantsuit, and I am very, very good at my job. Because I'm not just running simulations for the company, I'm running them for myself, constantly, a low hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. What if there's a multi-car pileup on the expressway? I'll take the arterial road. What if the cafe I go to for lunch has a salmonella outbreak? I'll pack my own pre-vetted, hermetically sealed salad. I map out every day like a general planning an invasion, accounting for every possible variable, because I know with a certainty that lives deep in my bones that chaos is always waiting for an opening. You see, I didn't choose this life. It was a lesson beaten into me by the quiet, creeping horror of watching my own family disintegrate. I was 10 when my father's world, and by extension mine, fell apart. He wasn't a bad man, he was just a dreamer, a man who believed in gut feelings and risky ventures. He saw patterns in the clouds, not in the market data. Our life was comfortable, stable, and happy, until it wasn't. The first sign was the car, a sturdy Volvo that was my dad's pride and joy. One day it was in the driveway, the next it was gone. He said it was in for repairs, but the strained look on my mother's face told a different story. Then came the whispers, hushed, frantic arguments that would stop the second I entered a room. Toys I'd outgrown were suddenly being packed for a charity drive. My piano lessons stopped, the house grew colder, the pantry emptier. My father, once a booming, laughing presence, seemed to shrink, his eyes holding a haunted, vacant look I'd never seen before. He'd made a bad investment, a series of them, chasing a high that never came, and it had ruined us. I didn't understand the finances, the talk of bankruptcy and foreclosure, but I understood the feeling. I understood the terror of the ground beneath your feet turning to quicksand. The most terrifying part wasn't the shouting, it was the silence afterward, the suffocating atmosphere of despair. It was the quiet acceptance that everything we had built, everything we trusted, could be erased by one uncalculated risk. That was the trauma that shaped me. I didn't just lose my home, I lost my faith in the world's stability. So I made a vow to my 10-year-old self. I would never be powerless again. I would be the one in control. I would build a life so rigid, so planned, so utterly predictable that chaos would never find a crack to seep through. The doll was an unwelcome anomaly, a glitch in the system. It was left on my desk on a Friday afternoon, a parting gift from a retiring colleague, Martha, a woman whose desk was a chaotic jungle of novelty mugs and inspirational cat posters. She probably thought it was charmingly quirky. I thought it was hideous. It was a small, stuffed thing, a caricature of a little girl that was a grotesque mockery of innocence. Its button eyes were stitched on unevenly, and one dangled from a single precarious black thread, giving it a disturbing winking leer. Its yarn hair, once probably a cheerful yellow, was matted with age and something that looked vaguely greasy. The worst of all was the smile. A simple stitched line of red thread, but it was stretched too wide, pulled too tight at the corners, creating a rictus of silent, manic glee. A tear in the fabric of its side leaked a slow, pathetic trail of grayish stuffing, making one of its legs limp and sickly. My first visceral instinct was to sweep it into the bin. It was a vessel of disorder, an object of pure, unadulterated chaos. But I couldn't. That would be an impulsive act, an uncontrolled reaction. Instead, I wrapped it carefully in a spare sheet of toppy paper, placed it in my briefcase, and formulated a plan. It would be disposed of on Tuesday, my building's designated garbage collection day for non-recyclables. It would be a controlled, scheduled removal. But as I held the paper-wrapped bundle, I felt a cold dread, a chillingly familiar echo of the past. It was the same feeling I got watching the movers take our piano, that sense of a foreign, unwelcome force entering my world, a harbinger of things beginning to fall apart. That night, the first thread of my carefully woven reality began to unravel. I placed the paper-wrapped doll on the small end table by my front door, a temporary holding area before its scheduled disposal. It looked obscene in my sterile, minimalist apartment, a tumor of ugliness on the clean lines of my home. My evening routine began as always: unpack my briefcase, put my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, and start the kettle for my evening tea. I reached into the cupboard for my favorite mug, a simple blue ceramic one I'd owned for years. I always kept it on the far left hook, always, but it wasn't there. It was on the far right hook, next to a white mug I rarely used. I froze, my hand hovering in the air. For a full 10 seconds, I just stared, my mind racing through every possible explanation. Did I put it back in the wrong place this morning? No, impossible. My morning routine is an unbreakable sequence. I replayed the entire morning in my head, a flawless, step-by-step execution. There was no room for error. I eventually took the mug down, a strange tremor in my hand, and dismissed it. I was tired. I must have made a mistake. A single, isolated anomaly. But the feeling of wrongness lingered, a sour taste in my mouth. Later, as I sat down to read, I noticed the second inconsistency. My book, a dense analysis of macroeconomic theory, was on the coffee table. I had left it on the arm of my chair, open to page 147, a silver bookmark nestled between the pages. Now, it was closed, the bookmark lying neatly beside it. A cold knot formed in my stomach. These were tiny things, laughably insignificant to anyone else. But to me, they were gunshots in a library. They were violations. My fortress had been breached, and I had no idea how. The feeling of being watched started in the bathroom. I was going through my meticulous 15-step skincare routine, a ritual that was as much about control as it was about hygiene. As I leaned over the sink to rinse my face, I caught my own reflection in the mirror. For a fraction of a second, just a flicker in my peripheral vision, it wasn't quite me. My hair in the reflection was tangled, matted. A dark, rust-colored stain bloomed on the chest of my crisp white pajama top. My mouth, in the mirror, was stretched into a wide, stitched-looking grin. I gasped, jerking upright, my heart slamming against my ribs. I stared at my reflection, but it was just me. Normal, pale, terrified me. My hair was neat, my pajamas immaculate. It was nothing, a trick of the light, a symptom of stress. I repeated the rationalizations to myself, a mantra against the rising tide of panic. But the image was burned into my mind. The air in my apartment, usually still and climate-controlled, felt heavy, charged with a strange static energy. As I walked back to my bedroom, a floorboard creaked in the living room. It was a familiar sound, the old building settling, but tonight it sounded deliberate. It sounded like a footstep. I lay in bed, my body rigid, my ears straining against the silence. The gentle hum of the refrigerator wasn't comforting. It was a low, predatory growl. The shadows cast by the blinds weren't just shadows. They were shapes, twisting and elongating in the dark. Sleep was impossible. Finally, a desperate need for proof, for reassurance, drove me out of bed. I crept into the living room, my bare feet silent on the cold hardwood floor. The streetlight from outside cast a pale, watery light into the room. And there it was, the paper-wrapped package on the end table. Everything looked normal, except for one tiny, impossible detail. The corner of the paper was slightly torn, and peeking through the tear was a single, dangling button eye. It seemed to be staring right at me.
That was it. The plan was void. The schedule was irrelevant. The carefully constructed logic of my life had been shattered by a piece of stained cloth and leaking stuffing. This thing, this vile object, had to go. Now. My hands trembled as I pulled a black trash bag from the kitchen drawer, the plastic crinkling with a sound that felt deafeningly loud in the oppressive silence. I walked back into the living room, my focus narrowed to a single point, the grotesque little package on the table. My heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against my sternum. I was done trying to understand. I just needed it gone. I approached the table, my arm outstretched, my fingers ready to snatch the thing and seal it away in the darkness of the bag. But as my hand drew near, the world tilted. It wasn't a dizzy spell. The floor beneath my feet seemed to slant at an impossible angle, like the deck of a sinking ship. The end table, once only a meter away, suddenly seemed to recede, the distance stretching, elongating, a visual distortion that my brain couldn't process. I stumbled, catching myself against the wall, my breath hitched in my throat. The pale light from the window fell across the doll, and its shadow, cast long and dark against the floor, began to move. It writhed, it twisted, it grew, the shadow of its head swelling to an unnatural size. And the shadow of its stitched smile widened and widened, stretching into a cavernous, silent scream that promised nothing but chaos. I was frozen, pinned against the wall by a horror that made no sound. It wasn't a monster jumping from the closet. It was the quiet, chilling, and absolute realization that the rules were gone. The numbers didn't add up anymore. The fortress I had spent my entire life building had fallen. And the thing I feared most was inside, sitting on my table, watching me with one dangling button eye. My paralysis broke with a surge of pure, primal adrenaline. This wasn't a simulation. This was a threat, and my only protocol was escape. I shoved myself off the wall and scrambled for the hallway, for the solid, reassuring bolt of my front door. But the hallway wasn't there. Not my hallway, at least. The short 3-meter stretch of polished hardwood that led to my door was now a tunnel, impossibly long, and narrowing into a pinprick of darkness. The walls, usually a sterile eggshell white, seemed to breathe, pulsing in and out with a wet, organic rhythm. The single recessed light in the ceiling flickered violently, casting strobing, disjointed shadows that danced like broken marionettes. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my analytical mind. I turned back, and the living room had changed too. The furniture was the same, but wrong. My perfectly aligned sofa was now canted at a sickening angle, one leg hovering centimeters off the floor. The books on the shelves were vibrating, their spines rattling with a sound like chattering teeth. The howling of the blizzard outside intensified, pressing against the glass of the 19th floor windows, not like wind, but like a physical weight. Then, from the end table came a sound, a soft, dry, rustling noise. I watched, my breath catching like a snagged thread, as the paper around the doll tore itself open with slow, deliberate precision. The doll sat up. It didn't move like a toy. It moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, its stitched limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. It turned its head a full 180 degrees, the loose button eye swinging wildly. It fixed its gaze on me, and the stitched smile seemed to twitch, to pull wider. A wave of nauseating cold washed over me, a frigid draft that had nothing to do with the storm outside. It was a cold that emanated from the very fabric of the room, a cold that smelled of damp earth, of decay, and of ozone. The room snapped back to normal with the force of a physical blow. I was on my knees in the normal 3-meter hallway, the living room perfectly still behind me. The paper lay in tatters on the end table, and the doll was lying limp amidst the scraps, its one good eye staring blankly at the ceiling. My entire body shook with violent, uncontrollable tremors, and a single, terrified thought cut through the fog of my panic. It's real. The sun rose on Saturday morning, but the blizzard hadn't stopped. The city was a canvas of swirling white, the world outside my window erased. My first instinct was to restore order. Order was sanity. I spent the morning scrubbing my apartment until my knuckles were raw, the scent of bleach a chemical shield against the memory of last night. I measured my coffee grounds with a digital scale. I performed my morning stretches, counting each second with military precision. I tried to rationalize what had happened. It was a hypnagogic hallucination, a wakening nightmare brought on by extreme stress. The blizzard was causing atmospheric pressure changes, affecting my perception. I cataloged every plausible explanation, constructing a new fortress of logic around the terrifying, impossible truth. But the doll remained, a silent, damning piece of evidence on my end table. By noon, my composure was a thin, cracking veneer. I decided I had to get rid of it. Not impulsively, like last night, but methodically. I would take it to the service floor and put it down the building's incinerator chute, a permanent, fire-based solution. I double-bagged it in thick, black plastic, tied the knot with a perfect non-slip hitch, and carried it at arm's length, as if it were radioactive waste. The service hallway was cold and smelled of dust and machinery. The metal door of the chute was heavy and cool beneath my fingers. I opened it, the dark, vertical tunnel promising oblivion. I dropped the bag inside and listened until the faint, distant thud echoed from the basement below. A wave of profound relief washed over me. It was done. I had excised the chaos. I walked back into my apartment, the sterile silence once again a comfort. I turned the corner from the hallway into the living room, and my blood ran cold. There, sitting in the exact center of my pristine white coffee table, was the doll. No bag, no paper, just sitting there, its limp leg dangling over the edge, its head tilted as if listening to a secret joke. That was the moment my denial shattered. It broke like the cheap porcelain of my mother's figurines, scattering into 1,000 useless pieces. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a hallucination. This was happening. My meticulously constructed reality had been invaded by something that didn't follow the rules, and my only hope of survival was to understand what those rules were. Control for me had always been synonymous with information. If I couldn't control the doll, perhaps I could control the narrative. I needed data. I took my laptop to the kitchen island, as far away from the doll as I could get, and began to work. First, I tried to contact Martha. Her corporate email bounced back immediately. User account deactivated. Her phone number from the employee directory went straight to a disconnected tone. It was as if she had ceased to exist the moment she walked out of the office. An informational dead end. My next variable was the doll itself. I forced myself to approach it, my lab-like detachment a flimsy shield. I photographed it from every angle, documenting the matted hair, the rust-colored stains, the disturbingly wide smile. I zoomed in on the fabric. It was old, a coarse, hand-woven linen. On the sole of its left cloth shoe, almost completely faded, was a tiny embroidered symbol, a spiral with 3 radiating lines. It was a maker's mark, perhaps, a clue. I uploaded the image and ran a search. For hours, I fell down a rabbit hole of antique toys, textile history, and local folklore forums.
The blizzard howled, the isolation deepening with every passing minute. And then I found it. On an obscure blog dedicated to regional superstitions, a post from 8 years ago. It described a curse from the late 19th century, centered on a woman named Elspeth, a seamstress renowned for her obsessive perfectionism. Her life was a tapestry of unbreakable routines, but a series of random, tragic accidents, a fire, a flood, a runaway horse, destroyed her home, her work, and her family. Driven mad by the relentless chaos, she channeled all her rage and despair into her final creation, a small, stuffed doll. A vessel for a curse that would seek out those who, like her, found sanctuary in order and dismantle their world piece by piece. The blog post ended with a grainy, black and white photograph of the original doll. My heart stopped. It was the same one. The same lopsided button eyes, the same matted hair, the same horrifying, stitched smile. A low groan echoed from the living room. It wasn't the building settling. It was a deeper, more resonant sound, like stressed metal or cracking stone. I looked up from my laptop, my eyes wide with terror. The doll was no longer on the coffee table. The air grew thick, heavy with the stench of wet rot and mold. A fine layer of black, powdery mildew began to bloom across the surface of my white quartz countertops. I backed away, my chair scraping against the floor, the sound unnaturally loud. From the living room, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It wasn't a trick of the light this time. It was a solid, three-dimensional darkness, a void in the shape of a man that seemed to suck the light out of the room. It had no features, but I felt its attention on me, a malevolent, ancient intelligence. The doll appeared at its feet, but it was changing. Its cloth body swelled and bloated, the fabric stretching and tearing. The gray stuffing that let out was no longer inert.
The final, definitive assault began not with a sound, but with a vibration. It started in the floor, a deep, tectonic shudder that rattled the teeth in my skull. I stumbled back, my hands grasping for purchase on the mildewed countertop as I watched my sanctuary of order come undone. A jagged crack, black and spiderweb thin, raced across the ceiling. It wasn't a simple fissure, it was a wound, and from it bled a shower of plaster dust and that same black spore-like mold. The entity, the swirling vortex of shadow and animated fabric, pulsed in the center of the living room. It was a hurricane of pure chaos. My meticulously curated furniture was the first to go. The sleek, minimalist sofa was lifted into the air, its clean lines twisting into an agonized parody of its former self before it was slammed against the wall with enough force to splinter its legs into kindling. The bookshelf vomited its contents. My ordered collection of economic theory and risk analysis fluttered through the air like dead leaves in a storm. The windows, my view of the obliterated city, began to crack, not from the wind, but from an internal pressure, the fissures spreading like ice on a pond. My escape plan, my fire safety protocol mandated escape plan, was to go for the fire escape off the balcony. I lunged for the sliding glass door, my feet slipping on the buckling hardwood floor. The glass didn't shatter, it warped, bulging inwards. The blizzard outside, no longer a landscape, but a distorted, milky cataract. The handle glowed with a brief, intense red heat, and I pulled my hand back with a pained hiss. Trapped. Plan B, the front door. I scrambled into the hallway, which was now tilting like a funhouse, the walls closing in. The door itself was covered in a thick, pulsating black mold. The deadbolt and chain rattling violently as if someone or something was trying to get in, not out. Every escape route, every contingency I had ever conceived was being systematically, sadistically erased. This was it. This was the same suffocating powerlessness I felt as a child, watching my father's haunted face as the movers carried our life away piece by piece. The same silent despair. I was 10 years old again, trapped in a house that was no longer a home.
a prisoner of a chaos I couldn't predict or control. My knees gave out, and I crumpled to the floor amidst the debris of my shattered life. I saw my reflection in a shard of glass from a pale, terrified woman with wide, haunted eyes. My father's eyes. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it detonated. My obsession with control, my life's work, was a fortress built to keep this exact feeling at bay. And it had failed. It had led me right back here, to this same moment of absolute helplessness. All the plans, all the numbers, all the routines, they were just a more complicated cage. A scream of pure, unadulterated rage and grief tore from my throat. It wasn't a calculated action. It was an impulse, a gut feeling, the kind of reckless, unplanned act I had spent my entire life despising. I scrambled through the wreckage, my hands bleeding from the splintered wood and broken glass, and my eyes landed on the kitchen. The knife block, miraculously, was still upright on a tilting slab of countertop. I grabbed the chef's knife, its familiar, weighted handle, a cold, solid reality in a world gone mad. I turned and faced the swirling vortex. It pulsed, its shadowy form condensing, the bloated, worm-infested doll at its heart. I didn't run a simulation. I didn't calculate the risk. I just ran, screaming, and plunged the knife deep into the doll's stitched, smiling face. For a moment, there was a deafening silence, a stillness that was more terrifying than the chaos. Then, the doll ripped open. It wasn't stuffing that came out. It was a blast of frigid air and a cacophony of whispers, the sound of 1,000 tragic accidents, a lifetime of despair. A shockwave of force threw me back against the wall, and the world went black.
I woke to silence. Not the oppressive, watchful silence of before, but a true, empty silence, broken only by the mournful whistle of the wind finding its way through the cracked window panes. The apartment was a war zone. Every piece of furniture was broken, every surface covered in a film of plaster dust and black mold that was already starting to dry and flake away. The blizzard still raged, a white curtain of beautiful, meaningless chaos. I pushed myself up, my body a symphony of aches and cuts. In the center of the room, where the vortex had been, lay the shredded remains of the doll, its fabric limp and lifeless, the black ichor dried into a brittle crust. The curse, the entity, whatever it was gone. I walked through the ruins of my life, the wreckage of my perfect, predictable world. Nothing was where it should be. The walls were scarred, the floor was a minefield of debris. My meticulously planned future had been foreclosed on, and yet I wasn't afraid. The gnawing anxiety that had been my constant companion for 20 years was gone, replaced by a strange, terrifying calm. My trauma had been born in the quiet despair of watching my ordered world fall apart. The entity had weaponized that fear, believing that forcing me to relive it would break me. But it had miscalculated. It couldn't account for the one variable I had never allowed in my equations, the reckless, spontaneous human will to simply say no more. I had spent my life running from the ghost of my father's impulsiveness, only to be saved by an act of my own. I looked at the shredded doll, then at the knife still clutched in my hand, and for the first time since I was 10 years old, I had no idea what I was going to do next. The numbers were gone, the plan was in ashes, and in the heart of the storm, surrounded by the ruins, I felt utterly, terrifyingly free.
There are more scares to share. Press the like button and subscribe so you don't miss a single terrifying moment. You're helping me investigate the deepest, darkest corners to bring you stories that haunt your dreams.